folks. Thanks for joining us. Um, sorry, Dennis and Kirk and Ben. Apparently, I was the only one that needed a tech check today. I was the one that had the issue. Let's see, is Ben here? I just want to make sure. That's the only technical detail I'm going to check before.
Ben is coming on right now.
Okay, awesome.
He was actually over at
hi
the
everybody. Welcome. Sorry, I had a few little technical difficulties. I'm going to present a few slides here at the beginning. Okay, here we go. Oh man, now I've stopped sharing. Sorry, guys. Okay. Can you see my screen that has Astro in the lower right-hand corner of the slide and says Healthcare Tableau User Group?
I can.
Awesome. And I'll presume that everyone else can as well. I see people are participating in the Menti poll. I am going to skip over doing that live, but we'll look at the results at the end since we got a tiny bit of a late start because I was tinkering around on Slack instead of technically checking myself. Please have a look at the Tableau Community Code of Conduct if you haven't looked at it previously. In one sentence, it means just be kind and respectful when you talk to other people in the chat on Slack or in any Tableau endorsed forum. This is the Menti poll. We'll skip that for the moment. I'm Nicole. I am a Tableau social ambassador. I am the founder of Women in Data Viz. We have a Slack that you can join by clicking the link in the interactive slide deck. I put it in Slack. I will also drop it in the Bevy chat in a couple of moments. I recently moved to Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, where my parents live, from hot Tampa, Florida. The cost of living is amazingly high there. Anyway, that is all I will say about my location. I'm a full-time data visualization engineer. Right now I'm on a contract with Moderna. And I will let Dennis introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. It's really great seeing everybody. It's been a while since we've had a meeting, so thank you for joining. My name is Dennis Cow. I'm one of the co-leads for the TUG. I'm currently a social work professor at Carleton University here in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. I've been using Tableau for about 4 years, trying to integrate it into some of my teaching and research, and I have the pleasure of being a Tableau visionary as well as a Tableau public ambassador. And it's great meeting everybody. Look forward to chatting.
And then just a couple of updates. I'm going to go through these super quickly because I'll share the slides with you and so we can get to the meat of our presenters' presentations. But Data Plus TV is going on right now. IMDb has been kind enough to share with the Tableau community a ton of TV-related data. I played with it last week and made a viz about Bridgerton. It was really fun. Women in Data Viz virtual coffee break is on September 26th at 8 a.m. It's a super low-key, casual networking event. We just get together and talk about whatever is on our minds, seriously, in pajamas, with all sorts of beverages, people from all around the world. It's a good time. Again, the link is here. And our own Dennis will be giving a presentation, The Case for Adding a GIS to Enhance Your Maps in Tableau at the Analytics Tableau User Group on the 26th. And then on this slide, we have the variety of ways you can keep in contact with the other people in the group. One of the things that has frustrated me for a little bit is that it's hard to keep contact in between meetings, hence the new Slack workspace that you can join. Please go to the intro channel and click, or the intro channel, and introduce yourself. That's what the intro channel is for. Otherwise, there was one more thing I was going to say about Slack. Oh, you should have gotten the join link in your email after you registered for this event, if you registered in the last 10 days or so. Let's see, we have a LinkedIn group. It is very dead, but it exists. And we're on X, Twitter, whatever. Whatever people call that these days. I'm going to stop there for now. So there's a channel in the Slack for folks to interact in the meeting. It's called 2024 Q3 Virtual Meeting. And I will answer, oh, yay, Dennis is already sharing links because he's awesome. Thank you so much, Dennis. Then I don't have anything else to say since I don't have to try to figure out the slide deck situation. So I'm going to pass it over to Kirk and let him introduce himself and then dive right into his topic.
Thanks, Nicole and Dennis. Housekeeping-wise, first, I think someone has to make me a presenter or something so I can share my screen, but which I can't yet do. But thanks for everyone.
Could you request to be a presenter, Kirk, and then I can grant it?
No, actually, Nicole has to unshare her screen, and then Kirk will be able to.
Oh, is it that?
Oh yeah, there's that part too. There we go.
Oh, it's that easy. Love it. It's just
yay! Thanks, guys. You know, it's a good new platform for us all still.
It's just embedded Google Meet is the interesting thing. Let me share my screen. So thanks everyone for coming, and thanks to Dennis and Nicole for the invite today to talk about one of my favorite topics. I think one of the most understood and underappreciated Tableau ones too, maybe. Let me start this and take close. Yeah, I'm KIRK MUNROE. Not too much on me. I'll get into in the next slide a little bit. Happy to be a first-time ambassador this year, especially in the data dev group, which is kind of funny. And I just wanted to start off with a couple of fun facts. The first is I actually have a degree in pharmacy a long time ago now, but as part of that degree, I worked quite a bit in healthcare standards way back in the day, even going back to even slightly before the internet was a big thing in terms of pharmacy claim standards and some other working groups in that area. However, since then, I've been in kind of the BI analytics space for 23 years now, I guess, including roles in product management at companies like Cognos. Currently, I'm one of the founding partners of Paint with Data with my wife and co-founder, Candy Monroe, who's a 4-time user group ambassador now, so some people might know her. And I actually worked at Tableau for 4 years, and then we've been doing Paint with Data. We're a niche Tableau consultancy company here based out of Halifax, Nova Scotia. And like I said, I've been using Tableau pretty regularly for 7 years now. Fun fact, I wrote a book on data modeling for Tableau. I think, believe it or not, it's still the only data modeling book. Of course, there's some good ones on Tableau Prep and stuff, but data modeling is a topic. In spite of that, another fun fact, although I've been using Tableau for 7 years and I wrote that book, I'm not exaggerating when I said I haven't written a line of SQL in 7 years. If I was being completely honest, I probably had a couple of create table ones that I had ChatGPT write for me, but never wrote one. So I think when we talk about data modeling, it's not, having to go deep on SQL. Another fun fact, which is going to affect the demo I'm going to show you today, is, and if anyone knows data warehousing terms, generating fake fact tables with conformed dimensions between them is clearly either beyond the scope of today's LLMs or me, one or the other. So I spent a lot of time with Adam Miko's data mockstar trying to create a good demo data set for today, and hopefully you'll see why it's almost impossible. So I'll show you part of it though. enough to make the point, I think. And then I'll go and probably do it with Superstore, because I made this presentation at a version of this presentation at Tableau conference, and I spent like probably 100 hours faking the data out. So it would have been hard to duplicate that whole effort again. So hopefully you'll be able to bear with me through that. So one last thing before we jump into demo, because I want to keep it on demo, and I'll close with a bunch of references. So whatever you don't get today in the next 35 or 40 minutes, you'll be able to get in the future. But my point of view, if it's my hot take's not going to be as hot as Ben's, I don't think. But in general, mine is that, Tableau is a decent data visualization tool. But at the end of the day, it's one of about 20 plus BI tools that do this well. It clearly does some things better than others. You wouldn't see things like most vision of the days in another BI tool. But it's also frustrating in that, as a lot of you know, I've been working with Tableau. It's not very easy to put together a dashboard, as an example, just because you can create great visuals, or else people wouldn't be writing Sigma plugins for it, and having to do like hour-long presentations of how to use containers. But I think it's by far the fastest and easiest, I should have said easiest, analysis tool on the market. So what Tableau is always meant to be good at for its 20 years is actually analyzing your data visually to be able to get answers to what's going on. And I think the biggest step forward on this point, I know I said it before, like it sounds like hyperbole, but I think it's true. Since the original release of Tableau is what I'm going to talk about today, which is multi-factor relationships. And then hopefully I can convince you, or at least get you on the path to learning more why, at least I made that statement, even if it turns out that you disagree with it. So let me just kind of jump into a bit of a demo of what I mean. Oh, before I do that, even, so if you take Tableau community projects, they're great for what they're great for, so I'm not going to take away from them. The challenge with them always is, how do you present what's truly real world data? So not picking on Mark Bradburn, it's great that he does this, right? But if you look at real world fake data as an example, and Dennis and I were talking about this when we do this, this is not what data actually looks like, unless you have a data engineering team, or maybe you do it yourself. You write custom SQL or a table or a view that you flatten all your data out. You would denormalize it in data speak, and you'd end up with like kind of one great big table. And what do I mean by this is, so if you take this hospital ER visits, first off, it's only hospital ER, but we would want to know, or at least I would want to know about these patients. What prescriptions are they on? What doctors have they seen? Maybe, they see in another healthcare professional, physiotherapist, a mental health professional, whatever it might be, is one part of it. Is that by the very nature of a flat table, you can't answer those things very well, because your table would be the size of infinity. And then the other thing is, the actual hospital ER system hopefully would have a timestamp of patient ID, but things like patient gender, patient age, their initial, their last name, their race, all that kind of stuff would be in another table altogether, right? And this would only have a reference to that patient. And otherwise, this, again, it makes these tables very big, which slows BI tools down. So in an ideal world, we wouldn't want to have to exploit our data like this. And we would like to be able to answer questions that are beyond just, say, ER visits. We'd want to know, like I said, some of those other things. So how would we be able to do this? It'd be very difficult if you were writing SQL, but what I wanted to show you is, let's take something similar. So let's imagine that we have a table that has healthcare visits in it, kind of thing, say visits to doctors, right? Regardless of what kind of doctor it is. So imagine this is just a flat file, obviously, for the sake of the demo, but in reality, what we would have here, is it would sit in a database somewhere. But the table would more likely look something like this, right? It'd be a little wider than this, but it would have the patient's health card number, depending on where they were. It would have the date of the visit. It would have the doctor's registration number, at least on, what would get filed for billing, et cetera, maybe an ICD-9 code or something, whether they wrote a prescription or not. There would be some other fields here for sure, but what would unlikely be in a table like this would be a whole bunch of information about the doctor and a whole bunch of information about the patient, right? So what we would do is, in a traditional SQL role, and what you would have had to do in Tableau before Tableau came out with relationships, is that you would have had to join that data together. And you could have done that in SQL, or you could have done it in Tableau. So again, before relationships were a thing, if we wanted to join patient and doctors to this, what we would do, and also ICD-9 codes, et cetera, is you would have to do this kind of thing where we would take our actual doctors and we would bring them in, and we would join them on doctor registration number. Tableau is smart enough to match that. But right away, when we do this, it's going to make our data much bigger. There's a few other things it's going to do, like it's going to, we're going to have to make a decision here of what questions we might not want to answer, right? So if, for instance, we wanted to know all visits, whether there's a doctor registration number on it or not, we'd have to go like that, right? If we wanted to know, which doctors no one went to visit, we would have to make a right join. If we thought, we want to be able to answer every question, we would have to do a full outer join. But you see this, not only does our data explode now, we run into really big problems. Like you'll see down here, we end up with a whole bunch of null values, which really limits us as an analyst. And it takes Tableau or any other query tool, really, it'll take it to its knees in terms of performance-wise if you had a lot of data. So that's why people end up building really small data sets that limit the questions they can answer. But Tableau helped us solve that problem in, I think, a pretty innovative way, starting back in with the 2020.2 release, which is this idea of relationships. So with relationships, I have this doctor visits table, and then I also want to take in a doctor table, and all I have to do, and again, I'm not writing any SQL at all, is I have to tell Tableau what's the common field or fields, like there could be multiple fields, between these two tables, right? And now, when I look at this doctor's table, we see that, I have info, and you would have a lot more, obviously, than this, but, the idea is this kind of information would be kept in a separate table in the source system so that it didn't end up exploding the data. You'll notice that I don't have to make a decision when I create a relationship in terms of what questions I could answer or not answer, because I'll show you that in a second. And another thing that's neat about this is, imagine if there were, 100,000, 1 million doctor visits, right? And we only had in our network 500 doctors. And we wanted to count the doctors, and we blew that table up. We would have to do a count distinct calculation, which, as everyone knows, is a pretty slow running calculation. In this kind of world, you almost never have to do count distincts, because if I count doctors, I'm going to get a doctor count. So if we come and look, what I mean by this is, what Tableau does is it takes both of these tables in, and it only decides at runtime, depending on what pills we bring into our view, what we want to show, right? So the other thing, let's just go ahead and bring in also our patients, right? So we also have patients, and they're going to match on patient healthcare ID, same idea, right? So what's great about this is Tableau is going to, depending on what we bring in, Tableau is going to dynamically generate a query against those tables to bring us what we want. So what this means to me is it gives us the ability now to be let me word it this way. What I think the skill set that matters now is in analysts is you really have to understand how people use these source systems and how the data gets entered and how it's related together, versus being really good at SQL and maybe not having any clue how the business works, right? Because Tableau is going to write our SQL for us effectively. So now what we can do is we can ask questions of our data, like which doctors have never had a visit, right, over this period of time. Again, it's a very limited data, right? But let me say we take this doctor registration number, we have 500 of them. But if I went over to our visits data and I pulled in a count of rows, you'll see that a couple of interesting things right away. It effectively has dynamically done in a full order join for us here without exploding our data, though. It knows that there are 59 visits that don't have a doctor registration code on them. So for whatever reason, they're not in our doctor database. But it also, if we sort this down, and of course it's Tableau, so analysis is easy. If I exclude these doctors, right, now, if I filter this down, well, sorry, I need them here for a second. Like you'll notice I filter them down. Here's a whole bunch of doctors that haven't had any visits. So had we done an inner join, all these doctors would have been eliminated and all these 59 visits would have been eliminated. So right away, this like kind of helps us out. And we could break it down also by, of course, by anything we wanted to. We could say, how many visits are there by specialty? Same 59, you know, we got to break down the specialty. And then we could also say how many patients of each of those specialties seen. And now we've just joined in yet another table, which is the patient table dynamically to say, by each one of these, how many doctors had visits and how many patients saw a doctor, you know, how many unique patients have seen a doctor. So 15 different doctors made 20 visits to that patient, basically. So it's pretty cool how Tableau can dynamically do that. Again, this data is not great, so I'm going to flip to Superstore. But I wanted to make sure I showed you at least conceptually in a healthcare context. Because the next thing we might want to do is say, well, we want to know what prescriptions were written for these patients. You'll notice that some of these doctor visits had prescriptions written and some didn't. So if we did that, that's another, this is what, you know, in data warehousing speak would be a fact table, because it contains information about visits, you know, it counts up visits effectively. So you can think of a fact just as a table that's primarily there for measures versus a dimension table, which is primarily there to describe, you know, measures. But so say we had prescription details and we also wanted to know prescription details. It would be really hard to join that in because they have nothing to do with each other. They share some common fields, right? Like doctor number, patient number, but they don't in any way look the same. Like one you go to a pharmacy for, whether it's in a hospital or not, and one you're seeing a doctor for, whether in a hospital or not. So what would we have done before multi-factor relationships, which is new in 24.2? So you could kind of think of multi-factor relationships as like relationships 2.0 in a way. So in the past, what was really difficult with these until this new feature is, let's say I also wanted to know about prescription details. Well, in theory, I could union them into this table, right? But again, a union wouldn't work well because the tables don't really look very much alike, right? Because what I really wanted to do is, I really wanted to take it and say, well, prescriptions have doctors on them, right? So I could bring them up there. And again, Tableau's going to say it's got a doctor number. But the other thing I would want to do is I would say, I want also to relate my patients to it. But you'll notice I can't do that. So this has always been a drag with relationships, right? And I could do this, but it's really a mess. Like you're going to get bad data now, almost certainly in your analysis if you tried to do this, because you'll notice I get two different prescription details. And depending on which one I pull in, only one answers questions about doctors and one answers questions about patients. So it's almost never a good practice to do this. So how would we fix this problem? Before it be kind of nasty, you might have to join it into each one of the, it would just be really hard, right? So typically people haven't been able to answer those kind of cross-functional problems with BI tools, which we don't talk about that much, but it's kind of a big deal. So what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to put in what is called a new base table, but it works the best for sure if it's a fact table. And now when I bring that in, I can go like that and take RX details and put them both on patients and doctors. And now, if this data were a little bit better, we could now say how many, say something like, how many prescriptions per visit does a doctor generate? Like, we could start asking those questions, right? Or equally, how many patients? You can get down to the level of, well, notice in this, I could get down to the level of, does that change? Whoops, why won't RX detail show up? Oh, right. Does that change, by the number of day supplies they give or the number of refills they give? Like, you could do pretty deep analysis now and compare that also to things like doctor visits. So the only reason I can't continue this demo very far is because the demo data is not going to give anything resembling a decent answer. But I wanted to start there so that you could at least see, hopefully, what it would look like with healthcare data before I flip over to do a proper demo on this using Superstore. But again, just remember that it could be this kind of data. Again, it's just really, really hard to fake this kind of data. Did anyone have any questions before I flip over?
There are none in Slack right now.
Okay, cool. So let me flip over to TZ24 shared dimension.
Well, we're probably missing the question channel. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no worries. You can put questions in the channel called 2024-Q3-virtual-meeting. And I will put it in the chat as well so you can see it. Sorry.
Okay, so everyone's presumably at least played with Superstore before. A story I tell a lot is when I went to join Tableau 7+ years ago now, we used to have to do a demo to join, and I went, I can't do it on Superstore because no one's data would look like Superstore. It also, the way Superstore is denormalized when you open Tableau, things like, a single order has multiple line items on it, leads to the creation of all kinds of level of detail calculations that in reality, if you left your data more as these base tables, you wouldn't have to also write so many level of detail calculations. It doesn't completely eliminate the need, but takes them down quite a bit, right? So what the Superstore source data would have always kind of looked like, say before relationships, which didn't exist in Tableau at the time, you would probably, at least at a minimum, it would probably have looked something like this, right? Which is, we have orders, and orders have customers, right? So customer ID to customer ID, and orders have addresses. Again, in reality, you might have, let me get that out of the way. You might have addresses off customers. It depends how your data is organized. But think about Amazon, where we have all these different addresses on our profile we can ship to. So they're probably in a table that also has a customer ID in it, but probably not on your customer profile because it repeats. And then we would have line items, because orders actually have line items, which is in it today. So what I would do is I would go order ID, and for my line items, I would go order ID, and then I would have a products table that went like this, and that would go off line items, would have a line item ID. Whoops, that would have a product ID, right? And then a product ID. So although I'm doing this quick, I think, although I said I haven't written SQL, which was meant to be provocative, you still have to understand data structures, right? So you have to understand that this is the way your data is structured, and what are the key key fields, next fields that are going to be the important ones that these tables know each other on. But these would be the tables these would be the keys that whatever application was generating this was also using to write to it. But so I point this out. A lot of people still do this today. They might write a custom SQL statement to do the same thing, overloading this with a whole bunch of inner joins. But I just want to jump back to my slide for a second about the problem with this again. Again, I talked about it a little bit, but I think it probably shows better here. So imagine what would happen with this is that this line items table has 944 rows in it, right? But combined, these all these tables have 27 fields. So something I write about at the very start of the book I wrote is what Tableau does is Tableau views your data almost like, you can at least conceptualize it this way, like a sheet in Excel that's got a certain number of cells in it. So people come to me all the time and say, how many rows of data can Tableau handle? And I would always be like, depends how many columns are in it, because you have to think about it almost as not a cube, because it's flat two-dimensional, but you have to almost multiply one by the other to think about how big your data source is. And of course, descriptive fields, like the ones that are in your dimension tables in this speak, are the fields are way bigger, probably, because descriptive fields are typically string fields, and string fields take up way more room than numbers do, because the way computers store data. So even if we treated every field the same, though, just to make it simple as a model, this would generate 270,000 cells, because you have to take all your fields and multiply by rows. That's the minimum number of rows you're going to end up with, and the minimum number of fields. If we did like outer joins, right joins, this number would go up, right? Remember that, in addition to nulls. The other thing this can't do, like I showed with the doctors is that if we did all these inner joins, I couldn't answer the question, which products haven't we sold, because the inner join filters that out, right? And again, how do I know, before I even produce this data model, if I'm producing it for somebody else, whether they might want to answer that question or not? Or again, in mine, which doctors haven't seen patients, right? Or which patient, have we not seen over the length of whatever's in our, visits table. So, but if we do relationships, right, the big difference is, what you do is you multiply each of these in and of itself, because remember, Tableau's not exploding these tables, right? And it's not doing inner join. It's like at runtime doing the join you need, depending on what you bring in. So this would generate, like, again, and this is a very small data set, it would generate 114,000 cells, or about 42% of the size of that other model. So this is a much bigger model, this one, right? And it answers less questions, because now I can answer any kind of join I want, depending on what I bring on, to get all kinds of answers without exploding my data set or having to deal with nulls and count distincts and level of detail calculations, and on and on. So that's why, and it's really important to understand relationships first before you can understand multi-factor relationships, because the concept's the exact same, right? So that's the important part. So I wouldn't want to do this, right? I'm going to back these out. What we want to do, and think about how much easier it is to model this as an end user, as a data steward, if you're going to create published data sources for other people, because all we're doing is, in a very visual way, just like we do analysis in Tableau in a very visual way, we're creating a semantic model. So in other words, we're describing how this data relates to each other by just dragging and dropping and knowing what fields, and then we're allowing the business, if you will, or at least anyone who can use, a Tableau Explorer license or Creator license, to be able to ask and answer their own questions, as long as they understand the business, right? So again, orders have addresses, so I'm going to go address ID and address ID, and orders have customers, again, customer ID to customer ID, and they also have line items, right, which is order ID and order ID, and then finally they have products. So now let me show you, kind of in a business or organizational context, of the limitation of only having one fact table. So anyone who's been around Tableau for a long time, this already is, again, much better than it would have been in 2020, but Tableau used to always have this thing. They even had shirts printed out back in the day about the problem in the data was the problem with the Superstore business was with tables in the East, right? So if we want to show what that meant, if I double click sales and profit, again, Tableau being Tableau is great. And what I mean by being a great visual analytics tool is, of course, it's smart enough to go, if I want to compare two measures, the best way to do that's probably a scatter plot. And then what I want, because tables is a subcategory, I'm going to take a subcategory on, and I'm going to put subcategory on detail. Quickly change that to a circle. I'm going to swap rows and columns just because it's easier on my brain. So this is the profit line below here, and this is revenue out here. So more revenue going this way, more profit going this way, and anything below this line means we're losing money on it. What Tableau did there is it got sales and product from our line items table, because that's our fact table, if you want to think about it that way, which we'll get back to. And then I brought subcategory on, and what Tableau did under the scenes is it said, oh, subcategory is not in line items, as you can see, but it can say, oh, but I can join on product ID, and product ID knows subcategories, and product ID knows sales and profit, so I can complete that query for them without them having a clue what the SQL looked like to generate that, right? Anyway, so this is sales and profit. You'll notice that our problems with tables, the demo that they used to show all the time is they go, well, why is profitability with sales in the East? Well, first let's do in the East. So let's take region and drag it on color, right? It'll break it down. You'll see it's the worst in the East, right? But tables are kind of bad everywhere. Actually, I think that's tables too. They're bad in most places, definitely in the East. Again, that's interesting. That's another table altogether. I dragged region in from addresses, but remember addresses was tied to orders, right? And then orders was tied to line items. So even though addresses, right, is not tied to line items, it can get there through orders, right? So it's important to understand this graph or your semantic model from a business standpoint, but not, a technical code writing standpoint. And then the last part they would go is they go, the reason's discount. So there's a million ways to show this, but we could put discount on size, and clearly our heavily discounting things are tables in the East, South, and then also in the West, but we seem to be making money in the West. And that would basically be the end of what Tableau used to call a bronze demo, which was, hey, we have a problem. Isn't it great? Tableau let you know why you have a problem, which is your discounting tables in the East. Why it was always magical to me, frankly, how quickly you could get to that, because it would take a lot more digging in most tools, but due to the nature of Tableau's visualizing as I'm dragging things on. What never sat well with me is that's not why we have a problem. That's just where we have a problem. We have a problem in the East with discounting, but I have no idea why. Now, of course, we can't fully answer why questions without doing experiments. Another whole presentation on correlation versus causation, but we should at least be able to say what other things might be correlated with discount, right? And those would be fact type things. So we got dimension type things we can answer that on, but there might be fact things. So it would be natural for me to ask, maybe we're generating a whole bunch of support cases on those tables, or step back from that even, maybe our tables are garbage, and so we have to discount them to sell them because no one likes them. So how would I find a proxy for that? I could find a proxy for that by finding out how many support cases we have on it, right? So again, same problem with the RXs I was showing earlier. So I could go find our support cases table, but where would I put it, right? Because support cases have products, and support cases also have customers. So I can't hang it out there, but now I can do this new base table thing. And I could say, support cases have customers. I've never fully figured out why it doesn't auto match these. I'm not sure I love auto match anyway. And then they also have products, right? So product ID. And again, at any point, if we want to see the table, you can just click here and we see the table, right? It really wouldn't have order ID, again, fake data, but it would have product ID, customer ID, and it would have support date, not order date, also just fake data. And then just to show that support cases also have sentiment, right? So this support case details, which is smart enough to match on, also lets me know if every call was neutral, positive, or negative. I'm just doing a one-to-one here to be simple, but you'll get the idea. So now I can answer the question, how do these subcategories, which tables is part of, generate support calls, right? So this is, I think, really big when you think about it, because those tables aren't union together, they're not joined together, they're sitting there completely independent of each other. My support cases and my sales, right? My orders, just like a doctor visit doesn't have to know about prescriptions that, well, I guess doctors show prescriptions, but say ER visits, right? But we can bring them together without even bringing those systems together, right? Like these two systems could know nothing about each other as long as their dimension tables are common across them, right? So that's certainly a thing. But so what I could do now is I could create a calculated field called support case ratio. So if I want support case ratio, and what this is it's what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a count of my case IDs divided by the sum of my, line items, the sum of my quantity. So basically, what I'm trying to say is for everything we sell, how many cases does it generate? And again, you'll notice whether I count or count distinct is not going to matter in this model because case IDs are unique to that table, right? If they appeared multiple times in that table, obviously I'd have to count distinct them if that made sense. In this case, I would count them anyway. So now, if I take my support case ratio, you'll notice that what this really means is we're generating 2.5 calls for every 100 things we sell, because we're generating 0.25 calls for every one thing we sell. So it's a little bit easier to think of. I guess I could have multiplied it by 100, right? But you'll get the idea of what it is. And again, so this calculation is running off two tables that have nothing to do with each other. But yet that's still a valid number because we can add those things up, and that's true. Now, if we bring something that's common to both of those tables together, like subcategory, and I always like these like this. If we take subcategory, you'll notice what we get is this gives us how many calls are being generated by each one of these subcategories. So chairs are the highest, tables are 3 versus 2.5. They're a little above average, but not that bad. Copiers, it doesn't look like it's tables. We could take this a step further, right? So remember, products are connected to both of these tables through a different route, right? Like we're grabbing subcategory from here, support cases gets it directly, and orders can traverse line items to get to it, is how that's working. By the way, once this model gets complicated, just so you know, you can always collapse it down like that, and you'll notice at any given level, if you highlight something, it'll show you the tables that it can interact with, right? So if we look at support case details, right, it knows nothing about orders, right? Like you can see orders is not highlighted and support case details isn't highlighted. So I want to show you something where I think Tableau is going to get better. If you're paying attention to the coming soon features, they talk about sensing, which is part of what I'm about to talk about here. So I'm going to get a warning here if I want to know the sentiment of those calls, right? So if I were to drag sentiment to color, I get this warning because at this point, Tableau knows sentiment's got no tie at all to my orders table, right? Or specifically, I guess my line items table is what it would need to get to, right? So other one. So in this case, but I know that if you think about that calculation, it does know the sentiment of my support cases, which are the numerator of that calculation. So if I split the numerator, this is going to give me the answer I want, right? So again, it's important to know your data, although I expect these messages will get better from Tableau over time as they continue to make the sensing better. I'm going to hope if people are colorblind, watch the numbers. So sorry about that. I'm just going to make it just so it's easy. Positive, neutral, negative. Again, I wouldn't use these colors in reality, but in in a real dashboard, but just for now, we'll see that tables do generate a bit more negative than other ones, but they also generate a lot of positive. So all this to say that it doesn't look like there's a very strong correlation between, without even getting into the statistics, I think as a general business user, you could say, well, I doubt that tables are what causing the problem, right? So we have other fact tables. I'm not going to go through them all. I've got returns, but let's just say we took inventory as an example. Then we also have inventory, and the only thing inventory knows is products, right? So we have an inventory of products. So first off, bringing new tables in doesn't mess up our other calculations at all, which is cool right away. But now we could also start looking for other correlations, like if we wanted to look at, say, we have this inventory table, so we could say how much inventory do we have, and then how much quantity do we sell, right? We could show it that way. Let's show it that way. That's fine. And then what we could do again, and I think this will make the point, and I can move on. But is we could take subcategory and we could drop that on detail, and then we'll see that this tells us that you'll notice that we have a pretty one-to-one relationship for every subcategory with the quantity we sell versus the inventory, say the inventory we have on hand, right? But here for tables, we have almost a 3-to-1 ratio of inventory for quantity on hand. So at least now, that wouldn't tell me that we have to blow stuff out and discount it and lose our profitability because we're overstocked in tables, but it would certainly let me run that down, because now there's at least a very strong correlation between the fact that tables are being between tables and inventory and tables and discounting. So I think, again, without having to write a bunch of statistics to check that out, we could pragmatically go, you know what, it could be a problem with inventory and tables. So again, that would be almost impossible to find without this multi-fact analysis, because how would you ever get that into one single table? So you need this kind of multi-fact to do it. And then just the very last thing I usually end this with, because it's important, is we would want to also conform dates across these. So we might want to know how are things selling versus inventory and support cases over time, right? So we could do that. So what we could do is, I've just got a simple little date table here as a date scaffold, right? And then, which I would always have handy. And I would just go inventory date is date to that. And then in this case, order date is date, right? Is date. And then this should be support case date, but I think it's still called order date. It would really be case date, obviously, not order date, and date. And then now I have a date field that I can also answer everything on as a very last point. So instead of using all the other dates, which you might even want to hide in your model, there's nothing in this table other than date. But now if I bring out date, right, and then I were to bring out, say, from my line items, how much did we sell, right? There's how much we sold, right? And then, well, let me do this for a second. So let me bring it to label, right? And then I could bring, what's our inventory level, which inventory level. So we could take inventory and drop that on there. And then you'll notice that there's only for 2025 is all that we have inventory for, so that's fine. And then what was the last one I brought in? Inventory support cases. So then we could also take our support cases and put that on here as well. And then, as an example, we can convert that to a month and then make it a line chart. And yeah, I was thinking I'd get, but anyway, there we see, of course we could make it measure names, measure values to get it all in one, but you'll see that shows us the trends of our inventory, whatever, because Tableau's smart enough to say date, right? It is tied to those dates, not in any of those tables, but it knows effectively dates equal to inventory date. The very last two things I'll say, without one of them doesn't take a demo at all, but one thing that's kind of important about this is sometimes and if you've worked with Tableau for a long time, Tableau's had something called blending, which is kind of horrific to use, but really cool. This actually uses the blending technology in a lot of cases, but with a much better UX. And what I specifically mean by that is sometimes, because the levels of aggregation are different, as an example, it would be so hard to write a SQL query because you'd almost have to run a subquery to aggregate it up and then join to the result of the aggregated view. In this case, what Tableau will do is it'll take the two queries independently at the right level of aggregation, and it'll stitch them together in the view. So there could actually be 2 or 3 SQL queries running on the view, but Tableau will line them up in the business context to give you the answer you want, which is also super powerful. And then the very, very last thing is it takes a while to wrap your head around this, and so the nature of these demos are, I think they work kind of better quick. But if you think about this, this is a fact table, this is a fact table, and orders really aren't a fact table. Orders describe how line items are grouped together. But remember, line items is where we had sales, quantity, et cetera, which are really facts, right? So it doesn't have to be there to work, but they do work better if you put your fact tables there. So if you make a model like this and you're like, ugh, that's a mess, how do I move this, right? You can actually, Tableau did some great things thinking ahead, like I can swap that with my base tables and nothing breaks, right? It's the same queries, right? But I think this graph is a lot easier to understand if you actually think about it that way, right? And now it makes more sense because products are tied directly to inventory and support cases without having to potentially go through orders to get it, right? So I think this is probably going to lead to like faster queries by doing it this way, but the query would still work the other way. And so that's it for the demo. The only very last thing I had is I'll make sure to share these slides with people just to say, because I've been talking about this a lot. And I had, so there's a few blog posts I've done. There's one on, I think, Ken and Kevin Flairlich's site on when to use relationships, joins, and blends in the first place. Then one specifically on this topic. There's one, all the links are on here. Maybe not that one yet. I'll put it on on Tableau.com last week. I did let Tableau write your SQL for you, which gets into what's going on a little behind the scenes. And then Thomas Mann, the Director of Product Management for the feature, and I did a presentation at TC on this where he got into a little more on the describing of what the queries are kind of doing underneath the covers. So that might be slightly over my 45 minutes. I didn't see when I started, but I'm happy to take questions if there's time for questions, or to wait around to the end at the end of Ben's presentation to take questions too.
Hey, Kirk, I think people have some questions in the chat, and I don't see any in Slack right now, but Slack is a good place where we can follow up after the meeting as well. Why don't you try to answer in the chat? If that's...
Yeah, I'll answer in the chat.
Okay. And then I'll capture the answers and I will put them in Slack for people to refer to later.
Okay, cool.
Thank you so much, Kirk. That was interesting. And there's a lot on this topic, I think, and there's going to be, it brings up a lot of questions, I think, naturally. So I think people will definitely have more. Yeah, the deck will be on the Bevy page in about a week, Sherry. And it'll be on YouTube. And yes, I will post links, Pam. And with that, I will follow up with all the questions that are in the chat. I want to hand it over to Ben. Ben and I worked together at Olive AI a while back, and he's just fantastic. But I'm not gonna. I'll let him tell you his own bio.
That's a kind intro. Thank you, Nicole. So I want to take a moment and kind of reset. Looking at Kirk's talk, which was brilliant, he started with kind of a philosophy around data modeling, and then went into specifics for how it can get used and how it's applicable and how it can be more efficient for your workflows in Tableau. And I'm going to start with the philosophy, and instead of getting tactical, I'm going to get strategic with it. So we're going to be thinking bigger, more broadly about what this could mean for the ecosystem of analytics and all of that. So I think we're talking to either different audiences or different sides of the same audience. So this is going to feel different. I'm going to apologize right now. This is going to feel very McKinsey. I'm doing slideware right now. I don't have demos. I don't have hands-on. I don't have any pictures. So I'm going to be talking at you with slide deck, and I'm going to do that awful thing where I read some slides to you because I think it's important. But this is a different tact, a different way of thinking about how you can improve as an analyst. So let's dive in with this. Oh, I'll note too, like, please harass me with this. I am coming at you strong with opinions on this. I would love to see people posting questions in Slack, and I'll totally like stop the conversation here and chat with you about it there. So with that, buyer beware. I got a whole bunch of reasons you should not listen to me right now. First, as Nicole mentioned, I met Nicole at Olive AI. For those that are not aware of Olive AI, it is probably best known for being an absolute bowl of shit. It exploded in one of the worst ways possible. I learned a lot from that failure, like a lot. There was more learned from me for how that went poorly than in some of the places where it's gone well. But I'd say that most of my learning has come from failure. So what I'm talking about here in these opinions, hopefully I can prevent some of the failures that I've seen for you. And I really have only seen a tiny bit of success. I've only had a couple places where I think, yes, we have nailed this. We've figured this out. So buyer beware. Learn from my failures, but that doesn't mean that I can point you in the right direction. This particular topic that I'm talking about here too is something that's been on my mind for a while. The company that I'm at right now is transitioning off of Looker, and we're looking at all of the different BI tools that are out there, rethinking our entire tech stack. So I'm still really in the middle of figuring this out. I think I've identified a real problem here. I don't know if my solution is the right one. So give me your opinions in Slack. I want to hear what you all think. And like together, we will get smarter on this one. But for this is like a really broad topic. What should the BI stack be? How should it work as part of a product? So I'm going to have some broad statements, broad topic. Maybe y'all have different nuances for me on this one. And Tableau is something that I worked with 8 years ago now. So y'all definitely know more about it than I do. So if I'm speaking improperly, correct me. Let me know. I want to learn from you. So with that, I want to start with the end in mind. Where are we going here? If I talk through the BI tooling journey for how an idea from inception goes all the way through a productionalized dashboard that is feeding your customers directly, this is how I would think it'll work. Somebody starts with data. They're poking around in data. They think something is real there. They're using Excel. They're directly querying a database, something like that. And like, there's something here. I want to build a dashboard. I want to get this information out into the world. So they use some BI tooling around that. Tableau, Looker, whatever. And then from there, I think that there are more steps. I think stopping at a dashboard is the wrong thing. So I'm going to guess that most of the people in this call right now are in that BI tooling layer where they are building their dashboards to answer their questions. But I think you got to go farther. I think that stopping at a dashboard is usually the wrong answer. So I'll talk through where I think other integrated tooling can come into play, and then when it might be applicable to consider custom software engineered tools. So hoping that's a little inflammatory and you're all like, who's this guy coming into a Tableau user group telling me that Tableau isn't the final answer? Well, I'll give you a little bit of background here. I have played pretty much every data role that is out there, from analytics engineering, data science, pure analyst, database architect. I've had a hand in all of that. So I've seen the full data stack. I've gotten to play many of those different roles, but all of that has been in healthcare data. I've worked in all over the place in healthcare data. I've done clinical data, optimizing surgeries. I've worked with supply chain. I've worked with claims data, doing upcoding, and fraud, waste, and abuse finding. I've worked with perioperative analysis, doing scheduling and population health kind of stuff. So I've had a really broad exposure to the different types of questions that people can ask with healthcare data, and then different types of tools you can use to try to solve it. But this has all been at very, very small startups. I've been like the first technical hire at certain places. I've been the CTO at a very small healthcare analytics company. And then briefly, I was at Olive AI, which was a behemoth with thousands of people for at least a couple months before it went under. And I've had a lot of experience with different BI tools. So, I haven't played with Power BI at all, and I'm not sad about that. But I've played with Looker, Tableau, and then some ones that people might be familiar with, Retool and Superblocks, that are more of workflow things. We're looking at Sigma, and yes, I put Excel on there just to kind of poke a little bit. It's not a BI tool. It's really not, but it's good for exploration. And then I've everywhere I've been, I've made the conscious choice to only work at places where data was part of the product, where the analytics was the purpose of the company, not a place where analytics is in support of it. I would die if I was helping someone optimize selling trinkets on the internet. Like, that just is not something I can spend my time doing. I don't want to be saying, oh, okay, yes, our analytics are helping with X, Y, or Z. Like, no, I want to be like making the change. I want the data to be the product. I don't want to be doing exploration. I want to be a way of implementing change. So I hope that this gives you a little bit of an idea of the stance that I'm going to take when I come into this, right? I am not going to say, small world, I'm a data analyst, I work in my BI tool. We're going to take a bigger perspective on this. I'm not going to say, this is just a little task that I need to do on the side. It's going to be a production environment for replicable and analytics, where you can take this, move it over to another customer, do the same sort of thing. Very much taking that stance there. Ooh, I saw a question here from Kirk. Oh, no, you're answering my question. Thank you, Kirk. You're the best ever.
My bad. Yeah.
No, that's great. That's great. Thank you. So I know, again, that the stance I'm taking is not the job that everybody has in analytics. You talk about healthcare analytics, and that means very different things at different places. So if you see what I'm saying here and say, that doesn't apply to us, I'd challenge you to say, maybe it's just, it doesn't apply to you right now. Maybe the place that your job is and your product is could be something that could be replicable across customers in the future. It could be something that becomes its own company, as I've seen before. Hey, we've got this one initiative that we're doing at a hospital. 3 years later, that initiative proves so successful that they spun it out as its own company, and then I helped build that up. So think big about where this could go for you, and maybe you'll see where you are in the journey here. And then just for fun, I'll give you a little bit of my own background here. I got 3 kids. It's a big part of my life. I was a teacher for 10 years. I'm now on a school board. I really believe in classical education. I like ultimate frisbee. I like hunting and hiking and all that kind of stuff. I had a choice at one time whether I'm a performance musician or engineer. Chose engineer. And boy, am I like a sucker for bad jokes. So sorry, you'll see some of those come out here. And I feel like everyone's got to have obligatory photos. Here's my life. You know about me now. Aren't we so personal in this room of 70 participants? So I dropped the bomb of saying, hey, you guys are like halfway through the journey. Let's follow up with that now. So the first part of this, I don't even think it's worth talking about Excel and just directly querying a dashboard. Y'all understand that stuff and why it has its own limitations. So there, case closed. Steps 1 and 2, don't need to talk about it. Step number 3, BI tooling. I don't want to put a definition around this, but I want you guys to think of like what I consider the core components of a BI tool. You got to be able to work with the data, as Kirk just showed. You got some really cool tools that you can do to model the data, manipulate it, clean it up, and all of that. Strong visualization, mandatory component. Got to be able to display the things that you're doing. You do need a way to explore the data. Again, like Kirk I learned things from him today about powerful ways that you can explore your data. But you don't want to have to do that all with direct code. So a low or no code platform is the way to do it. And then I'm pretty sure every BI tool out there has some embed options so that you can take your visualizations and embed them inside of a website and have kind of a personalized frame around things, or a bigger way of plugging into the picture. So all that I consider core part of BI tooling. So with all of that, what's the primary use case? What is BI tooling used for? I'm not telling you anything you don't know here, but just want to like level set before we go into the more controversial stuff. And FYI, I stole this straight from Tableau's website because I thought it was brilliant. You're simplifying complex information and visualizing it. Like that is the core of what an analyst's job is. You can use this to find the current and past state of a company or something like that, and use that to monitor, measure, analyze things. Lots of different actions that you can take based on the current and past states of what you have. If you plug in ML models, sure, you can predict the future, but that's really a current state prediction of the future in my mind. And a lot of this is used not to show granular data, but to summarize and give a general idea of where things are so that you can inform action. So it is to drive data-driven decisions. And like I want to emphasize this. This is again straight from Tableau's website here. You want data-driven decisions. So you are trying to affect change here, right? That is kind of implied in all of this. If something is going wrong, you want to be able to take action on it. Or if everything's going right, you don't need to. For example, tables. You could see that those tables were an outlier in the inventory. You'd want to take some action based on that. So I am going to use some of the stuff I've worked on in the past as examples here. So I'm going to spend a lot of time on this slide. I want to go through each of these different things that I've done in the past, and maybe you can see where I'm going with this next, because we're going to keep coming back to this. So one fun use case I worked on was surgeon scorecards. It sounds like really snooty. Oh, I'm going to tell a surgeon how they're doing. No, but if you can present all of the information for a surgeon, for themselves, it's really, really powerful. Show them their volumes by procedure type. Show them their outcomes, what their readmission rates were, surgical site infections, all of that. And then be able to compare them to their peers. This is an extremely powerful tool for surgeons to know who to talk to. A lot of the hospitals that I've worked at, there's not a great culture between the surgeons of sharing information and, rising tide lifts all ships. It's extremely competitive. So what we found at one of my old companies is if you can encourage this competitiveness and channel it in the right direction, you actually can get more collaboration between the right people. So if you can show volumes and show that this guy over there has higher volumes and better outcomes, well, if you want to be like him, maybe you want to go talk to him or her. Right? Like this is a great way of having surgeons optimize their own practice by giving them data they would not otherwise have. That was a super fun project. And then we also showed the effect of surgical choices. If you took the blue stapler as opposed to the red stapler, and the blue stapler was $500 with a reticulating head, and the red stapler was the simple thing that was $80. Did that actually affect outcomes? Were you in and out of the surgery faster? Were there fewer surgical site infections? Is that blue stapler actually worth it? Those aren't questions that they haven't been able to answer in the past. So tying together all the data to make that happen and show the effects of surgical choices, Super, super powerful use case. But again, I want you to have in the back of your head, okay, I've got a dashboard that shows that. Now, what would they want to do with that information? Okay, we had a dashboard that showed how effective some of our automations were. So we had a separate ML team and integrations to the EHR, and we were automating some processes for them. And we wanted to show to the customer how many clicks were saved. Oh, this is the efficacy of our product. So that basic product analytics proving the value of what we have. What's our action there? Well, let's think about that one. Next thing that I did, referral patterns. So this is claims data showing how patients flowed from a general practitioner to a surgeon when they get that referral. So who's referring patients to providers who did a low number of surgeries or did all of their surgeries open when they should be doing minimally invasives or stuff like that. So this is a great way for surgeons to increase the volume of their practice by going after those referral patterns and say, hey, I see you're referring to Dr. X. I do better than they do. Refer your patients to me instead. So it seems to me like that would be a very action-oriented kind of dashboard, tells people exactly where they want to go, where they want to communicate. Surgeon scheduling efficiency. If a surgeon has a block time that they're supposed to do their surgeries in, and they have that room during that time, are they actually using it? Are they using it to the highest and best use cases that they can and getting the most, urgent patients in there? Is there a better way that they could be assigning these blocks to make it a group block as opposed to an individual block, those sorts of things? So that was a super fun dashboard that we made that definitely had implications and actions that needed to be taken based on it. Inpatient discharge blockers, this is a fun one. It's not particularly unique. There's a lot of different people out there that did this, but I enjoyed being able to take my own stab at this. If you have patients that are ready to be discharged, they're considered healthy by the provider. We want to get them out the door as fast as they can. So what's the blocker? Why are they there? Do they need to get insurance approval to go to a skilled nursing facility? Do they need to get their prescriptions filled before they leave, something like that. So just help healthy patients get out the door faster. So extremely action-oriented dashboard there. And then Medicare Advantage, fraud, waste, and abuse. What patients are overcoded and how can you do some audit prevention there? So definitely some actions on this. So let's take these use cases now. I've just blabbed at you for a long time about this and figure out kind of different categories for these. So two of these out here I would consider actionless. We've got our first one, the surgeon court scorecards. Cool. This is just like your current state. What you want to do with this as a surgeon is really up to you. How you want to take your next steps. I am not going to tell a surgeon what to do. So there's no follow-up that this dashboard needs. And then the automation of metrics showing the efficacy of our product. I don't know what you want to do with that. Okay, cool. We are getting our money's worth out of this. There's no action to take there. So I'm just going to take these off. These are not interesting use cases to me. They are a place where the BI tool is the end of it. We've shown the dashboard. Our work is done. But the rest of these need follow-up. They imply follow-up. So what sort of follow-up could they be? Well, let's think about these discharge blockers. Patients in the hospital, they're healthy, they're ready to go. And we can show that they are being blocked by their insurance company. They need to get prior approval to do stuff. Or we can show that they need to get their prescriptions filled. But I can't have an automated tool that fills their prescription for them and walks it down the hall and gives it to them. I can't talk to the insurance companies and get them to do that prior approval faster. There's no action that I can do as an analyst or that we can do as a company to solve this problem. So demonstrating that there is an issue, super valuable, but resolving that issue, not something I can do here. So it's off the list. What about the rest of these? If we dream about what we could do with these, surgical choices, is the blue stapler or the red stapler the better one? Well, there's truth to this. Either it's worth it to have that expensive stapler, or it's not worth it. So if we want to make that statement, that we find that, Nicole, that's a great point. Informative, explanatory dashboards. That's a great a way of categorizing those like actionless dashboards. Super valuable. Not knocking them. That is a mandatory part of our work, but it's not all of it. So if we go to these that are beyond that informative, beyond those explanatory dashboards, and I want to say that one of these staplers is better to use for this type of surgery than the other, then I'd love to make that change. I'd love to get the surgeons to stop using that expensive one or to start using that expensive one because it has better outcomes. So from a hospital standpoint, what this means is changing the doctor preference cards, of which there's a massive workflow involved. It needs approval from supply chain. It needs approval from the surgeon. It needs all of these different steps. Sometimes this is done on paper. Sometimes this is done through a system external to everything else. Sometimes it's just a nurse going through and saying, I talked to them, I talked to them, I talked to them. And then they go and change a piece of paper that's got the doctor preference card on it. It's such a pain in the butt. But how powerful would it be if we had a tool that did that showed, hey, I think we want to change to the red stapler. Someone clicks the button and now they can walk through and make that change through the doctor preference card. They can send an automated email with a button on it to supply chain, says supply chain approve, deny. They could send one to the surgeon that says surgeon approve, deny, and manage that workflow for your customers. That is stepping beyond just the BI, I am showing you something that, right? Now it is solving the problem for your customers. It's taking it all the way to the end. I have shown you something we need to do, and now I'm gonna help you do it. I'm gonna have more about this in the next couple months, so I'm very excited to tell the world about what we're going to be doing with that one. Referral patterns here. So we have shown that one of these primary care physicians is referring patients to their buddy who's 2 years away from retirement, and he is doing things the old school way. And that is bad for the general practitioner's patients, right? So we have identified, me as a surgeon, I want to increase my volume. That primary care physician is referring people to somewhere they shouldn't go. Why don't we automate sending an email for them? You can even use an LLM for this and like have this like great backstory that you have of, I see your patient volumes are this. I see you're referring to this provider who has these sorts of things they're doing to them that aren't good, super low volume. Like, why don't we just build that email for them and send it and see if we can just like automate changing those referral patterns? Again, much broader scope. Yes, we had a dashboard that showed it, but how do we close the gap? How do we make this problem solved? Surgeon scheduling efficiency. So if we show that a surgeon is not utilizing their block time well, and we want to reduce their block time, or we can show that a surgeon fills their block time and they have all these add-on cases that they're doing that they're having trouble finding time for. Well, why don't we just show that this person and this person should make that change? Less of their time, more for theirs. This requires approval from the schedulers and from the surgeons themselves and like this whole system that we have. But like right now, they're picking up a phone, calling people, oh, you don't have time, I'll talk to you later. And then just the inefficiency in the system for actually making this change dramatically limits the ability of the company that's providing this information to have an impact on the business. Our goal is to change things. Our goal is to improve the system, not just to show that there's inefficiency, not just to show that there's place for improvement, but to take it across the line. So let's do it. Let's talk through those workflows, figure them out, help people manage the change and not just the demonstration of it. Fraud, waste, and abuse. This was a fascinating one. So one of the companies that I worked at, we, again, started with de facto upcoding. Who are the patients who are sick but don't have the right diagnosis code. So they've been on insulin forever. We know they're not pre-diabetic. It means they're diabetic, but they don't have a diabetes diagnosis. Let's get them that diagnosis so you can get reimbursed properly. We very quickly found that we could flip that and say, we can find the patients who are overcoded. This person, you say they're diabetic, but they're on metformin and their A1C has never gone above the limit to be considered diabetic. So they're actually pre-diabetic. Like, there's all these analytic ways of finding patients who are overcoded. So you can find this like preventative way of saying, this is an audit risk. These are patients that you're going to get penalized and lose money on. So if I think through this as, okay, I've now got this list of patients and list of diagnoses that we think are not relevant. Well, what's the company supposed to do? Go call them up and say, hey, do you actually have diabetes? Oh, no, you don't. Okay, now I'm going to go through your individual charts and remove that diagnosis. Like, no, that's not going to happen. Instead, what you need to do is pull all those patient records. You need to analyze them in as much of an automated way as you can, pull out the relevant information, display that to a coder or a clinician who then makes a choice based on the chart. Do we need to pull this patient in and get them seen? Do we know automatically that there was a coding error that we can fix? And if there was a coding error that we can fix, can we just fix it? Like, the process for doing this, you just submit a claims, a fix essentially to whatever systems you need to, and then the problem is solved. It's not just a dashboard that shows it. It solves the problem. It closes the gap. And if you're thinking right now, well, like, that sounds really freaking hard. Like, managing change means you have to understand the business exceptionally well. The technology for connecting these different systems. Oh my gosh, I'm just an analyst. I can't possibly do that. I want to change the way you're thinking. Like, these things are so much more solvable now than they have been in the past. The technology that is out there, not just with generative AI, all that kind of stuff, some of the tools that are out there, the platforms right now, make this so much more solvable. And it all comes down to workflows, right? Do you have a definition for the way this change needs to happen? Can you write it down as a workflow? And if you can, then you can build a system around this. So, Nicole, I love that question. So I'll state this out for everyone who's not on Slack. Nicole asked, if we start fixing these problems, where does the data team's job end and the rest of the business's job begin? I've worked at very small startups, right? I've been on teams of 7, where that is the company. And I hate having a title in those jobs. I don't like thinking my job ends here. I have to hand it off to somebody else. Particularly in analytics, I do not think it is healthy to say that you don't need to understand some part of the business. I think it is really good to say, like, if I present this information, how is somebody going to use it? Because that should affect the way you present it, right? Like, this is a big expansion. Maybe this is the difference between like a senior and a principal or something like that. But like, that mentality of saying, I don't need to think about that. I want to change your mentality. I want to change everyone's thoughts about what their job can be. If I have time, which I might at the end of this, I've got like a series of different rants that I can go through, you all. And one of them is that I think the title of data analyst should probably disappear and instead be subsumed into either an analytics engineer, where you are managing the pipeline and the answer and the actions from it, or be subsumed into a business role, where all you need to know is more about the business and the tools will help you do all of the jobs of an analyst. At the end, I want to hear more about this Tableau Einstein thing. This sounds fascinating. Again, y'all know more than I do about this kind of stuff. So where's that line between the data team's job and the rest of the business team? Right now, it's mostly constrained by tools, right? You say, I don't have a physical way of implementing this change. But again, there's some massively cool tools out there that can really change this. So let's see. I'm going to keep poking at that one. So to do a good workflow tool, to do an implementation of workflow, you really need to know the action that needs to be taken. I'm presenting this information in order to make this change. So you need to have a workflow tool that can do a couple things for you. It can record the intended action of the user. It can say, this is the observation, therefore I want to do X, or I want to ignore it, or something like that. So you need to have a tool that can essentially write back into a database. That's like my fourth point here too. It's got to be able to like save the state somehow. It needs to be able to have users interact with their different states. So it's not going to be the same user that manages the entire workflow. You're going to need to be able to hand things off between different people and still keep the process moving for all of these sorts of things. So now you need a multi-user system. It's not just one person that's going to be managing any workflow of any complexity. That chain of decisions, in this space I do this, then it goes in this direction, then it goes this direction. You need something that can handle that complexity. I've been looking at Sigma recently, and they have a really cool workflow kind of backend that they can do. Very, very simple though. They are really intentionally not going into the realm of super blocks or retool. But it might be just enough for, Pareto principle, 80% of the things that are out there. And the ability to write data back to different systems, I think, is incredibly important. So some of this is you want to be able to write back to your direct database. So I want to write back to the data warehouse that I'm pulling data from. Or you might want to be able to save this to a different state. You've got an application backend that you want to save things to. Or even better, and this is the one that I love, you want to be able to make arbitrary API calls and say, I've got this endpoint over here that my software engineering team is managing. I want to write it into the EHR. Just a simple API call. I think all of these are mandatory parts of a good workflow tool. So this is what I put this word on it. I'm making it up. Integrated tooling. It is a two-way system. It is reading in information, deciding on an action, and writing back out somewhere else. So integrated tooling. It is the answer to what do I do with this dashboard? What next? Like, how many times have I heard that in my prior companies? Like, great, like, what do you want me to do with this dashboard? Well, somebody's telling me that I failed in my job. Our company has failed in our objective. If somebody does not know how to take it to the next step. Yes, this is hard. This is brutally hard. But I think the first step in like making this easy is recognizing that BI tooling is incomplete for your customers. Sometimes, you've got, what were the words that you use? The informative or the explanatory dashboards. That is where it stops. That is the value of the dashboard. That is enough. But it is incomplete most of the time to say, here is the information you need to make a decision. And then I am not going to help you manage the change. That doesn't help customers get across the line and actually realize the value of your product. So what works in integrated tooling? Well, low code. I do not want to have a business analytics person go learn SQL, go learn JavaScript, go learn Node.js. Like, it's not necessary anymore. Low code tools that are out there, or even something like straight up no code tools. They used to call them WYSIWYG back in the 90s for those that are old like me. There's so much you can do these days. I want to focus these workflow things on the workflow, not on the visualization. The visualization is the first part of it. BI tools are fantastic. Workflow tools are a different thing. Now, Nicole, you originally had asked about tool sprawl. I want to come back to that at the end, but I do think that this is a place where specific tools for a specific purpose process are mandatory and super, super helpful. So we can take the visualizations from the BI tools, that's what they're good at, and embed it inside of this integrated tooling so that we've got these two pieces side by side. I see this, I take this action from it, and now these two worlds are walking together. Again, holding that state is super, super important too. The API systems, that's hard. Like, that's really hard. That is not, oh yes, we just are going to make some API calls to a magic backend that works. This is a fantastic moat for a business, though. You'll need a software engineering team if you're writing your APIs, or you'll need someone with at least cursory experience in like Python or requests or something like that in order to be able to make API calls. But if you get to a point where your company is calling internal or external APIs in order to make a change for your customers, that is a massive differentiation, right? That is a big, big deal. So it is hard. I'm not denying that fact, but the value in doing it is such that thinking to that level is going to just be such a massive differentiator. So even if you don't get to that point, though, even if you just have a workflow tool that says, all right, we have now gone through the approval process to make this. Doctor preference cards, let's go back to that one. So we know that we want to change everyone to the blue stapler. It's the complicated one, but our surgical site infections drop by 90%, and there's so fewer readmissions. It's worth that extra couple $100. Cool, we got approval from the surgeons. We got approval from supply chain. We got approval from, I don't know, whoever manages the room where these things are stored. And now somebody gets an email that says, please go make this change in the DPC system. That's great. No API calls. You just have different people logging in, clicking yes or no, or responding to email saying yes or no. Like, that's all really easy to do with the tools that are out there today. And if you don't want to go make the DPC chart change yourself, if you don't want to have to figure out how to talk to the EHRs, you are still so much better off than just showing blue is better than red, right? You've managed the process of making the change. So even if you don't get to step 5 there, even if you don't get to be the final person that records the change, you can still manage the process. You can still build that consensus, as you're saying. So the two tools that I've used for this have been Retool and Superblocks. They both work great. There's tons of options out there right now, but there are places that they fail, places that I wish there was an easy answer for. So if you end up with some very complicated user interactions, okay, if they click on this button, then I need this modal to pop up that needs to pull in this data, present this information, and then it'll have to branch in this direction. And then if this prior state was this way, then I need to go this way. If you end up with a flow chart that is just like, 5 pages of options, these low-code tools get really brutal to work with. So when it gets hard, these integrated tools might not be the right answer. If you need some really complicated interactions between that visualization that we're embedding and the workflow tool. So say, okay, they click on this, then it pulls up in this other visualization, this information, which gives them a drop down where they click a checkbox, which adds it to this queue. No, that is too much to ask of some of these integrated tooling systems. And if you have if the visualization gets to a level of complexity where it's just not reasonable to ask a low-code tool to do it, if you're like, okay, we need to bring in like a D3 person to build this customized thing for us, that's where this falls down to. You'll know it when you get there. Again, the visualization tools are able to do a whole lot more than they used to. Like the mapping stuff that's available now, you used to have to code that yourself. Now it's like off the shelf. It's lovely. It's getting better, but there's still corners. But the biggest thing that I've run into, the place where I've seen most of the times where I'm like, my system is breaking, is with the performance of these sorts of things. When I end up with data that is very, very large and very, very complicated and inherently has a lot of joins in it, and I can't denormalize it, I need another solution here. I cannot have somebody waiting 5 minutes for a page to load so that they can take the next action. Like, people are just too impatient for that kind of thing these days. So performance is sometimes not solvable with the tools that have been available up to this point. And another place that I've seen just raw limitations that I need some way to surpass is with user management. Again, my goal coming from a data as a product world is to build a system that can go to multiple customers. I have one hospital system. I built my discharge planning. I want to be able to take that discharge planning, move it over to the next hospital system, make no changes, and it just works. But when you're getting to this world now where you have multiple hospital systems all using your tool, I don't want to be managing the users for that. I would love to appoint an administrator at the hospital system that can then say, okay, this person on this workflow has this permission. This person on another workflow has this permission. I don't want to be in the middle of that, right? I don't want to be in the middle of that at all. So that complicated user management, a lot of these low code, no code tools either suck at, straight up can't do, or as to my point number 6, they become unbelievably expensive. Again, I've got one thing that I want to roll out to 30 different hospitals. That means I now have hundreds or thousands of people logging into this system, and I'm paying by seat. Unbelievably expensive. So once your company gets to a certain size, money alone might be the reason that these low-code tools are no longer a viable option. So if all of this breaks, if Ben comes and has this great idea, let's do workflows, let's pull in this new tool that does our workflows for us, and you start hitting these problems, you might need to think about the next level, which is the custom software engineering. If you get to that integrated tooling, this is a fantastic way of building your first couple times through this and managing it. But once you hit a certain point, you need to think now about custom software engineering. I really want you to be reticent to take this jump, though. I've been at companies that did this too soon. And I really, really want to emphasize the point that moving from something that you've built with these low-code tools to a software engineered solution has many, many advantages to it. But boy, can it suck. Those performance problems that I spoke about, the reason you're going to a software engineered team is because they're not easy to solve. Otherwise, you would have already solved it. So expect that you're going to have to spend a lot of time and a lot of money giving the engineering team time to solve these performance problems. So again, you might just not be able to solve them otherwise. So that's why we go to the engineering team. But it's not a silver bullet, right? You're not just going to solve it. Engineering team. Now my performance is going to be good. It means work. So don't assume that it doesn't. So just again, summary. Why do we go to a software engineer tool if we need to? Performance, because you need things that aren't in those tools otherwise, because the way that you've built it is just crap and not maintainable and an absolute mess, because you're limited by the tools, or because it's just too freaking expensive. So for all these reasons, we go over there. But are you really sure that you need this? Once you go to a software engineered tool, you will not be going backwards, right? You are not going to take something that was software engineered and put it back into your BI layer. That is, your users will not accept that. Your product owners will not accept that. There is no moving back. So make sure that the product that you're trying to get to that next level is worth it, because it's expensive. That's my point number 2. It is so expensive and slow, right? Now, on these BI tools, you're used to doing what KIRK did. I'm going to pull in this data. I'm going to see this, check out this graph. The work that he just did, if you were to build software engineered tools for that, would take weeks, right? So it is so expensive to build things with software engineering teams. The maintenance of it is also very expensive. And if you try to do this cheaply, you will end up with a cheap product. So you want to pay for this. You want to give the software engineer teams time to do this well, because the whole reason we decided to make this jump from the low-code tools to software engineering tools was because we reached a limitation that made it hard. So don't expect it to be an easy solution. Now, with software engineer teams too, it would often be a really bad idea to have them querying Snowflake or Databricks or BigQuery. Any of those analytics backends are not the right backend for a software engineered tool. So now you're going to have to maintain multiple data pipelines. And very likely you're going to be embedding part of your BI things into these software engineered tools. So now you have to keep these things in sync, like not only like in sync with the data, but in sync with the timing of it. So my DBT job finishes over here. I need my DBT job to finish over here at the same time and keep them aligned. So that is actually a really brutal problem to solve. It makes the complexity of your system substantially higher. And I want to take a lot of time to talk about this last one, because if you just get an off-the-shelf software engineer and bring them into this stuff, they are not used to working on data products. Data products are very different than standard software engineered products. It is one of the biggest hurdles that I have seen out there. So buyer beware. Why are they different? Well, if I define a data product, I define it by using the data that is not in the system. Software engineers are used to controlling everything. They control their backend. They control the way it's structured. They design the system the way they want it to be. But if you have a data product, you have an entire central part that you do not control. You are pulling that data from somewhere else. If someone decides they're going to start sending you null in a certain field, you have to be able to handle that, because you are not the one creating that field who made the choice to start sending it as null. So software engineers start to fall down when they don't have that control and they make assumptions about the data and they're not checking it. So it is a very different mentality. So to this first point here, software engineers are mostly concerned about what is the state of my software right now. They don't care about history. They don't retain their history. If you want history, you're going to have to pull it at certain times or have a concurrent system that writes out changes and all of that. They are not used to maintaining prior state and maintaining that information unless it directly affects the front end of their system. Again, these external dependencies, total sea change in the way that software engineers work. So it takes a really good product owner to make sure that this works successfully. And then data modeling between a software engineer tool and an analytics tool, widely different. You know, Kirk's talk that he just gave on normalizing the data and making sure that the joins are appropriate and not just flattening it, so important for successful analytics. For a software engineer tool, you want it flattened. You want it performant. You want pre-aggregated stuff if you want it to be performant. So it is a very different way of handling data and interacting with it. So again, all of this to be like, you guys are really sure you want to go through all of this and figure out a software engineer tool? You sure there isn't another solution? Because you're opening a whole new world of hurt in order to get something done. So let's take a look at this again from the beginning. Yeah, again, I don't want to talk about the first two steps. They're boring. Y'all understand that. Hopefully, you understand why I think BI tooling is incomplete, why it is not the right answer for some sorts of questions that your business might be solving. Integrated tooling, hopefully I've gotten you curious about that. You're going to go out and take a look at some of these different things that you can do to affect the change in the real world. But also understand that it has its limitations and that custom software engineering sometimes is the only answer, but boy, is it expensive and hard to do that well. So what does this look like then when you bring it all together? In my mind, I want to emphasize that none of these steps are replacements for the prior step. At no point will I move over to an integrated tool and stop my subscription to Tableau. They work together. And in my mind, if I was to have a product that required all of this, this is the system I would build. I have the BI tools. I've got my Tableaus, my Lookers, whatever it is, where I do rapid prototyping of the dashboards. You can move so fast in these systems. You can do the exploration all the way through building a productionalized visualization that is end user facing and super, super utilitarian. So that BI tooling, it's got to be a part of your system. You do not want to use software engineers to iterate on your product. It is too slow. If I think of a software development lifecycle, prototyping, beta testing, all the way through pre-general admission is BI tool as far as you can take it. For performance across multiple customers, that's where I make the jump. But BI tooling, always going to be part of the stack. All the agile ceremonies. Yes, indeed. Integrated tooling. This is taking that next step, taking the action from the BI tool. So you can embed the visualization in there. No need to redo that work. Why would you redo that work? I don't want to do this in JavaScript. I don't want to have to learn D3. Like, it's great to just pull it straight from there, embed it inside of your integrated tooling platform that does your workflows for you. But again, if you reach a point where it's like, this isn't working anymore, it's not scalable, it's too expensive, whatever the problems were, that's where you say, cool, we're going to tear out the old, move those products, individual, not the whole system, just those products that need it, over to a custom software engineered solution. And that is the world that I dream of. That is how I see companies growing over time and having a system that allows for flexibility, allows for rapid growth and discovery, as well as scalability and meeting your customers' needs all the way through the end. Oh, am I on time? That is a miracle. So there's my big takeaway, right? Understand the limitations of the tools you have. Empower your users to act inside of your system, as opposed to having to go outside of it to make these changes to actually affect the real world. Because that's my goal with analytics, is to affect the real world. All right. I finished on time. That's a miracle. I think I've hit many of the questions that I saw through here, but Kirk, do you want to enlighten me about Einstein? Because I have not heard anything about this, and I would love to learn more.
And I think you're not the only one, actually, Ben. So it would be a useful question for a number of people.
Sure. I think, so a little background first. It's a new product that is currently being called Tableau Einstein. It was spoken about again yesterday. It's kind of a terrible name because it's really Tableau. It's really Analytics Cloud or something. But what it is, I think, is that background. I'm filling some things in that I'm pretty sure, based on their conversations, that Salesforce figured out that they had an action framework without data-driven decision-making in, and then they bought Tableau and got a data solution. They thought that they could have all these developer hooks for years. No one did it, or very few people did it because it's expensive. A lot of things you went through, and so they're developing a brand new Tableau, basically, where they're. It certainly looks like to me like Tableau as it exists today will continue. But there'll be this new that's currently called Tableau Einstein, which is the Tableau user experience built on top of Data Cloud and the Salesforce platform. So it won't. So anyone who's fully bought into Salesforce gets the kind of things you're talking about. Like, I get an insight, I can immediately drive action without any coding because I have an action platform that's the Salesforce platform. And the data will already be kind of taken care of, and to be able to add data, like you said, because it's all through Data Cloud. Now, the downside of it, I think, is that it's but this is going to be a downside of any system, I think, is it's a system lock-in play for sure. It's going to be your data warehouse is Data Cloud, your action framework Salesforce, but on the flip side, what you trade off on on being locked into Salesforce you make in an integrated product. So,
Yep.
you know what I mean? Like everything's got to trade up, but I think they've learned the things you said, like probably from hearing from customers for a long period of time, and then seeing, I think they thought it would just be easy to say, you can just add Tableau to Salesforce and a Lightning Web, and then no one does it. Do you know what I mean? Or maybe not, no one does it, but it's not really integrated. Do you know what I mean? It's like sticking an URL in an iframe at the end of the day. Do you know what I mean? It's not like an integrated, but this thing is completely in line with the stuff that you're talking about. Again, in a Salesforce system locking kind of way. But
sounds like I need to go back and listen to some Dreamforce talks.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people are interpreting it as the next Tableau as opposed to the new Tableau. Or maybe that's not even fair. Another Tableau, maybe. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you already get that vibe from like the Tableau Pulse experience, right? Like the user interface is totally different. It doesn't even feel like Tableau. And I'm not saying, and it's not in a good or a bad way, because I've yet to find a use case for Tableau Pulse that works in the real world. Has anyone put it in the chat if you have, because I need one.
The only three things that Paul shares with Tableau is the data model, the security model, and the queer, whatever you want to call it, like VizQL data service effectively. Like that's it. Like there's no UI components.
Yep. The UI looks like every other data viz you see in every other website. It's interesting.
So I'm curious about this a little bit, because you see this separation in the
yes, I was just thinking about this. Like this is one of the problems, is the separation.
Exactly. Like I think a core part of the reason that people could create separate tooling for workflows and visualization is because individuals do not view it as a cross responsibility for their job, right? They think that's a different team. Someone else is handling that there. So they build a different tool for it. It's not an integrated system. God, I'd love to see it all in one though.
Well, this talk is really your, go ahead, Kirk.
Yeah, I haven't been in BI for so long. I think what the problem actually is after all this time, well, there's two factors at play here. One is that people don't understand that there is analytics for strategy purposes to ask questions like, should we change the way we do things? And then there's kind of whatever you want to call it, operational
monitoring, operations monitoring.
I need to take, why not take action on this right away when I see it, right? And the problem is Tableau has really only been good at the former, candidly, unless you integrate it, right? And no one wants to sell that first thing because it's a limited audience, right?
Yeah.
And
it hurts. It hurts. It's so hard. It hurts. But I mean, I was at an org that tried to do it.
They might now get it right. You know what I mean? To say, hey, there's a part of your business where you truly have analysts who aren't trying to change the way people do things immediately based on their findings, but rather analyze things over time to affect strategy, operational changes, org changes, et cetera, et cetera. And then there are those things that you get insights from that you need to take action on right away. And I think they're very distinct processes, but people don't want to think about it that way. You know what I mean? Like there's
also a very culture and mission and personal work ethic or personal philosophy about what you should do with data. Sort of, I mean, there's so much in here to think about, Ben, from very concrete sort of yes or no kind of examples to really, what is your philosophy about what you should do with data is what I think the real question is when I hear this whole talk in one piece.
Yeah. That's the vibe I'd love you to take away with. So I'm glad that's the question you're asking yourself. You know, I'm working with a friend who's building a financial modeling software for charter schools, right? They're trying to build a way for charter schools to manage their budget. But the question immediately came up of like, well, why would you manage your budget and your strategic plan separately? shouldn't your budget and your strategic plan match? Shouldn't you be able to see your current allocations and see if they are in line with your budget and in line with your strategic plan? And if you're seeing them different, wouldn't you want to do something about that? Like, wouldn't that imply that you want to take some action and change some budget lines and maybe reassess your strategy? Like, I think all of these things, if you stop thinking, my goal is to show the current budget, my goal is to show the expenditures right now, and you start stepping back and saying, like, why is this important? What is the value in showing this? It inherently leads you to, well, I'm trying to make change. I'm trying to affect something. So
Right.
I think that broader vision.
I mean, you have to all, well, you don't have to, but I'd like to acknowledge that there's also that, like, I have to get this done by tomorrow or this asshole guy is going to scream at me. Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is not a
or woman, this asshole woman also could say.
I was going to say another exciting thing maybe for, the Tableau community, even though this Tableau Einstein sounds different, is I had a great conversation with Tim of Tableau Tim fame about a month ago, but then he and his wife went and got a baby, so it's still not on the channel. But, important things. But in it, I talked about how this is, I think, a very different product, and people aren't seeing it's a different product, but which I got, I didn't feel like some people got. But then what he definitely got that I didn't get that made sense, which Ben aligns with what you said as well, is I'm like, I don't know why they're pitching this to the traditional Tableau data fam so much, right? And because it's a different product, aren't they going to alienate
Because
them?
we're not the decision makers in this area, really. I mean, as a consultant, I often get to say to people, here's what I think your real problem is. And in fact, it's my favorite part of my job. But yeah, it isn't. You're right, Kirk, that it's not. I mean, maybe we should offline, like, have a little.
We should offline, but the reason I think I was wrong and Tim was right is because something Ben said, which is in not the exact same way, is Tim goes, well, all these Salesforce developers and admins are going to have no clue about data. Like, they need to bring somebody in who understands data. It's easier to take data people and get them to understand and put this in an action framework.
100%.
Right, action frameworks understand data. And I'm like, of course, that's why they're doing it or whatever. Like, but it went by me, and then I'm like, as soon as he said it, I'm like, and then that lines up exactly with what you said.
That does make perfect sense. Tim, he'll break it down into one succinct sentence.
Yeah,
I'm like,
smart guy.
Well, this has been a ton of fun. I'm super grateful. Thanks, Kirk and Nicole, for chiming in here too. Again, I love when I learn something as part of this too. This has been a blast.
Yes. Thank you so much, Ben and Kirk, for being with us today. After we had a little bit of a break in our meetings for a while, it was super fun. Kirk, I hadn't even touched multi-factor relationships yet, so now I'm ready to touch them. So thanks so much, everybody. Continue the conversation on Slack or on LinkedIn or wherever. I know for Ben's part, I know he likes these conversations. Look how he lights up. He gets so happy. So feel free to reach out to him and ask him more questions or throw a hot take at him. He won't mind. And Kirk is around. He's in all the data fam areas. You could find him very easily. We hope to have more information on a Q4 meeting pretty soon. Dennis and I will have a chat about that and then broadcast it out to the universe. There will be a recording of this session on the YouTube Team Data Fam channel. Chris McClellan runs that whole process, and I mean, it's automated, but he also has some manual parts. So sometimes that takes up to a couple of days, a week. So don't think we forgot if you don't see it a couple of days. But after a week, then send me emails. Anyway, have a lovely day, everybody. I can't wait to see you again soon.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Ben and Kirk.
Truly a pleasure. Take care.